Hi everyone, Kristen here. I'm going to talk about micturition process. Micturition is the act of urinating. There are two different types. We have involuntary micturition and voluntary micturition. In involuntary micturition, occurs in young children and people with spinal cord injuries that disconnect the brain from the lower spinal cord. And the picture that I drew here is involuntary micturition reflex. The process starts off with the filling of the bladder. So here is our bladder, and the bladder is filling up to about 200 milliliters or more. This will cause the stretch receptors to excite in the bladder wall. So the stretch receptors will cause the excitement in the bladder, and this will cause sensory fibers in the pelvic nerve. So we have our sensory fibers right here in the green. We'll send a signal to our sacral spine, which is here. This is our sacral spine. Which is, the signal is usually sent at the segments of S2 and S3, which is between here, S2 and S3. The efferent signals, so coming back from the spinal cord, so we stay within the spinal cord of the sacrum. It will travel back to the bladder by motor fibers into the parasympathetic ganglion in the bladder wall, and output from the ganglion excites the detrusor muscles within the bladder, which is right here, and it will relax the internal urethral sphincter, which is right here. These are the internal urethral sphincters, which result in the emptying of the bladder. And that's involuntary micturition reflex. Now, in voluntary micturition, pretty much the same thing occurs from involuntary. The filling of the bladder to about 200 milliliters or more. It will excite the stretch receptors in the bladder wall, and that will cause sensory fibers in the pelvic nerve to send signals to the sacrum, which will go through the sacrum and all the way up to the pons, which within the pons, it receives that signal in a micturition center. And within that, there's three different ways it can go. So when there's a time that we have to urinate, the pons receives that signal and returns that signal to the spinal interneurons. So it'll go back down. So the red, it'll go back down, and the spinal interneurons, so it'll go back down and it'll enter here in the parasympathetic ganglion in the bladder, and it will excite the detrusor, which is the muscle within the wall of the bladder. So it will excite here, it will excite this, and it will relax the internal urethral sphincter. So this will get relaxed and urine is voided. The second one is when it's not time to urinate. So when it's not time to urinate, so the signals will come all the way up. So it'll go same way, sensory fibers go up through the pons, and the cerebral cortex will receive that signal and the excite spinal interneurons will keep the external urethral sphincter, which is here. This is the external urethral sphincter. So it'll come down, come here, and then the external urethral sphincter will contract, and the urine will retain in the bladder. So this will contract, kind of close, and keep the urine in the bladder. This will give a person the conscious control of when to urinate and the ability to stop urination midstream. This is where toddlers learn how to control that. And that's, when it comes to potty training. The third step is when it's time to urinate. So you go through the same process, the stretch receptors, get that signal, send it through up to the pons, up to the cerebrum, which comes back down and inhibits the sacral neurons that keeps the external sphincter closed, and the external urethral sphincter will relax. This will relax, and urine is voided. So yeah, this is the process of micturition, and I hope this helps y'all. Bye!